Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 Podcast, the show for readers of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. This is Season 3, Episode 14, and today we're discussing the next book in the Witcher series, The Tower of Swallows by Andrzej Sapkowski. And, of course, if you want to toss a coin to your podcasters, you can join us on Patreon or channel memberships for access to exclusive bonus content with each episode. And for this episode's bonus content, we're going to be talking about portal fantasy, which Leanna is not really a fan of, but there are portals in this book, so it's related. It should be fun.
Yeah, portal fantasies.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's a single thing that I would say that I hate 100% of the time, but it's not something I tend to like.
Not a go-to for you. Fair enough. So we'll be discussing that for our bonus content. But yeah, Tower of Swallows. I'm still...
What did you rate it?
I feel like these are all getting the same rating for me, mostly 4 stars.
Okay, so the first time I read it, I gave it 3 stars, and this time I gave it 4. Everything else has, I think, a 5 from me.
Yeah, most of them have been 4 for me. I do feel like, though, it's partly because I'm reading it closely and taking notes for the podcast, because otherwise I would just lose track.
You had warnings that I didn't have.
Yeah.
So, I warned myself on the second time through. So, because I remembered it actually being worse than it was. So, because I went in this time being, remembering how annoyed I was at, the kind of, all over the placeness of it. This time I was like, it's kind of like when I reread Feast for Crows by George R.R. Martin. The first time I read Feast for Crows, I was like, what? And then I remembered it just being the worst. And so then when we did our read along and I reread Feast for Crows, I was like, you know what? Actually, this book is pretty great. It's you know what? I actually not maybe my favorite, but close because I knew what it was and what it wasn't. So I wasn't expecting it wouldn't give.
I think I probably did better with it because I did know going in to expect that. And I was like, this isn't too bad. There were some sections where I was like, okay, why are we talking about the economics and politics of this random little city?
Well, if you enjoyed that, get ready for so much more of that in Lady of the Lake.
Wonderful. But I feel like it did. I could see where he was going with it, even when it got... And it wasn't frequent that he did it to that extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's more frequent than a reader might expect if they're not expecting it at all.
True. Very true. And I do think, too, if I hadn't been reading it so closely and taking notes for the podcast, I would have been like, what is happening? I think that helped me follow his through line better than I would have with a casual reading of this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still think that, yeah, so having read the series before, now rereading it, kind of knowing how he's going to be pacing and structuring things. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, it's not the emotional reaction of seeing that and being frustrated with it. It's more okay, so I know it's going to be that, so get ready for that, and then think about why it's like that or something like that, where it's because the first experience with a movie, with a song, with a book is more you're vibing your way through it, and then second, third, fourth, 7th time you're it's or going through... I think I usually use the comparison of going on a dark ride at Disneyland or something, where the first time it's just oh, the story and the animatronics, wow, and then the 50th time on the ride you're that's how they do that over there, and I can see the wall behind that one, and now you're seeing that stuff. So I definitely tried to pay attention more to now that I know he's paced it like this. If I was Andrzej Sapkowski, why am I pacing it like this?
Yeah, there's a lot going on here, but I think the thing I figured out, which I think helped kind of carry me through it, that I figured out pretty quickly, is everything is centered on what happened on the equinox. That's pretty much the majority of the book. Is what happened on the equinox, what led up to it, what happened after it, what does it mean, what happened with Ciri,
and
that's...
Of course, I don't know what it's in Polish, so part of it could be translation has some bearing on how clear something feels or how consistent something feels, but let me wait a few seconds so that we're at least 5 minutes into the podcast.
Are we about to get an Abercrombie reference?
Abercrombie. But because like you said, like not the whole of the book, but a lot of the book is this kind of like the equinox being like this like linchpin like thing around which things are revolving, and then you're like seeing different perspectives on that. And like Abercrombie does a similar thing quite frequently, where like an event is seen through multiple perspectives, or like a battle is seen through like a like domino of perspectives. And like he's really good at kind of like making you feel like I understand, like visually seeing like this is the thing, and we're seeing everything around it. Whereas here, like if you're paying attention, you're like, okay, so like everything kind of revolves around the equinox, but it's not this like very obviously like a sensing like that I am revolving around the equinox, you know, where like I think he handles better. Again, maybe in Polish it's clearer, but in Abercrombie's books, like I don't know. I don't think it's a thing of subtlety. I think it's just like narrative clarity. I don't know.
Well, also, I feel like when Abercrombie does that, it's in a constrained part of the book. It's not usually the entire thing. Whereas I feel like for Tower of Swallows, pretty much almost the entire novel is that's kind of the linchpin. That's the thing that's connecting it. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. Well, obviously I gave it 4 stars. I still mostly enjoyed it, aside from the one chapter where it started with, I was like, why? I don't care about this small city and their economics and politics. Why do we need this like lengthy
here
discussion
also
of it?
So like both George R.R. Martin and Andrzej Sapkowski are extremely undisciplined with like how many perspectives they're going to be giving you. They just like keep adding them if and when needed. And I do appreciate that Joe Abercrombie like works within the like limitations that he sets for himself, where he's like, these are my perspectives and there will be no other perspectives. These are them. And so then like when that means that like these perspectives have to be able to tell you the story, and have to find a way to do it. And so then I appreciate that like it helps with scope creep, and it helps you to like have to find more organic ways of delivering information, instead of like, let me just randomly show you this other scene with other people who you won't see again, just so you can learn about this world of thing. Like it's harder to like have to come up with a way for the characters you've chosen to find out this information that doesn't feel like, hey, person on the road, I've come to deliver some exposition to you. So like, yeah, I think that it could benefit from like forcing yourself to like a lot of the stuff that's like this like tangential, like off we go over here to learn this thing now. Like I understand what bearing it has on the world, and like vaguely why I would need to know about it when I am following the stories of my main characters. I would like an author to like force themselves to find a way to make our main characters be the ones who have eyes on this for us, or find this out, or are near enough to it where you could figure this out, instead of just being like, they don't have it, so we're just gonna go over here for a second to people that you don't care about, have never seen before, and won't ever see again. And it's like,
well,
it's cheating.
I mean, I see what you're saying. I also think though that some of it is authors needing to be a little more disciplined about the fact that not everything that they find interesting or helpful about the world, the reader is going to find interesting or helpful. And so sometimes we get these lengthy pieces of exposition where I'm like, okay, you could have condensed this into a few sentences that would have given us the basics of what we actually need to know, what you're trying to convey. The rest of it, like, that's great for you. Put it in an appendix somewhere.
Or honestly, footnotes.
Or footnotes.
Like, I think that the Witcher series would actually, especially if a footnote functions in a way where like it is skippable, so that like if someone is like, I don't care about this, that they could just not read the footnote. But if people who do care about the world of stuff can read the footnote.
I would be much more into this story using footnotes. Yeah. And I like footnotes, so I'd probably be more interested in it if it was structured that way, honestly, than I am when it's in text like this. So, yes, exactly. Info dump side quest syndrome, Matt. Exactly. That is exactly it. Oh my goodness. So there was a lot that happened in this book.
Well, for me too, the second time around, like aside from just generally kind of knowing better what to expect, So like obviously the pacing and the side questing and the info dumping and stuff like that is stuff that I was like, okay, I know it's going to be like that, so just get ready for that. But also, as we talked about before, I forget it wasn't last time, but whenever we talked about it, about how like the realization that he's writing about the Soviet Union basically in Nilfgaard. And so there's like so many times now, ever since I realized that like that's the lens through which I'm now viewing a lot of stuff in the series, which I never did the first time I read it. Because I was a poor summer child that didn't know that that's what he was writing about, didn't think about that. So like stuff like that, I think there were so many times in Tower of Swallows that like maybe that's even why I bumped it up to 4 stars. It wasn't even that it was a little bit that I knew what to expect, and that like I knew to not expect it to be tight and to be Geralt focused and all those kinds of things. But also I think I found more interesting a lot of the asides, because now instead of reading it as a story, I was like reading it as like an allegory, and I was like interested to like try to parse his like views about the real world through that.
Yeah, I could definitely see that as being interesting. I feel like I took in less of it just because it was my first time reading it. So I see pieces of that, but there was so much else I was trying to keep track of. I don't know that that was the main thing I was focused on. The one of the oh, okay, maybe I should save this for later, but there's a thing that happens kind of toward the end with Geralt and Ciri's characters that I think is particularly interesting in this book going forward, but I don't know where we want to start with this conversation because it's pretty early.
Well, are we doing non-spoilers still, or no, or?
I guess so. I don't it's also hard to know like what's a spoiler in this.
I mean, I think we usually,
Yeah.
if we do non-spoilers, like 10 or 15 minutes. So like we can move into spoilers, and then I
All
guess
right.
unless there's like a thematic way to go through this, then the easiest is just to go chronologically and then address themes as they come up.
Yeah, I guess so. Um we've got, well, obviously throughout it we have the whole swallows and the Tower of Swallows and
Which
the Raven.
interestingly, the English American version
Yeah.
is a mistranslation by having it swallows plural, and that every other translation, including the British English translation, is the Tower of the Swallow,
The
because the
Tower,
swallow is
oh,
like a symbol for a person, and so
right.
like it being plural in English is, in American English, is like it's wrong.
That makes a lot more sense because the swallow is Ciri from obviously. But even in chapter 1 we get this random side story that didn't make a ton of sense to me, but about a raven and a swallow, and like that's kind of setting the stage for us continuing to get the reoccurring sort of theme. I don't know who, like, is Visigoda supposed to be the raven? Is it Geralt? Like, does it matter? I don't know. It's unclear to me.
I don't know / remember. I'm not very good at like reading. So like, okay, so I already didn't notice that it was about the Soviet Union the first time, which I think is fairly obvious once you know to look for it. And that's like kind of like the general book kind of generally being about that. But when it comes to like
Right.
actually like this, like some character sings a song about, red berries on a tree, and clearly this is a symbol for blah blah blah. Never, literally ever do I understand that kind of like
Okay. Fair
imagery
enough.
symbolism, or people will be like,
Yeah.
well, they were wearing white in this scene and that's a representation of, I'm just like, that sounds great. Nope. Would never.
Okay, cool. Fair enough.
So
Yeah, I feel like the raven is supposed to be significant. I'm just not 100% sure who it's supposed to represent. It could be a few different things,
well,
but
I think, okay, trying to think back, I think the most obvious, I'm trying to remember how the story went too, which is hazy for me. But the what's his name? The Nilfgaardian that like rescues / kidnaps her in the beginning, that she has
oh.
nightmares about, has black feathers on his
Oh,
helmet, and she has like frequent nightmares about that.
that's a good point. Oh, that's interesting.
I can do symbols sometimes. Look at
Yeah,
me.
look at
I
you.
also might be completely wrong, but like I spotted a connection.
I mean, you definitely might be right. Yeah,
It's
it's
a
a little
definite
unclear.
maybe.
It's a definite maybe. Oh, yeah, there's but she's sort of the like it's representative of spring. I guess because swallows are probably a spring bird. Is that like I'm assuming that that's the case.
I live in Los Angeles.
I know, like we know, but
Why would I
I'm
know that?
guessing. Yeah, but they keep saying it's like the child of the Elden blood, a symbol of spring. So I'm like, I'm guessing a swallow is a bird that comes to Poland in springtime, and that's why. Um, yeah, and there's this whole like
In general, I
winter
mean, birds, migratory birds are like heralds of spring.
spring, right?
Like,
Yes.
not just swallows.
Yeah,
So, like,
yeah,
if
yeah.
swallows, well, we know
Like a
swallows
robin.
are a migratory bird thanks to Monty Python. So, swallows would be heralds of spring.
They would. It's
Thank you,
probably
Monty
like a
Python. It's educational.
yes. This would be a, if this was written by an American, it would probably be the Tower of the Robin.
Sure.
You know, something like that. Oh, I love this. It's all that practice Lana got with Book of the New Sun with the symbolism. True story.
Yeah, that was hard. Why
Yeah.
do you think well, I shouldn't say what my theory. I guess my theory is not very spoilery. Why do you think my theory for Book of the New Sun is that he's just crazy? No symbols. He's crazy.
That's funny. I think okay, so with the spring thing, right? We have this so throughout the story, it's centering on the equinox, which is fall. And it's cold and colder than it's ever been, and they're gearing up for this harsh winter. But then Ciri is the symbol
Because
of
climate
spring and
change is a big
rebirth,
thing in this world.
right? But then Ciri is going to be the symbol of like rebirth and springtime, and that's kind of what we're moving towards. So it's interesting, like the sort of like cold ice versus spring and warmth. That's interesting. Oh, this is interesting. We have a comment saying swallows return every year to San Juan Capistrano, and there's a whole festival around it. Oh, that is interesting. Huh.
But yeah, I mean, I already compared it to A Song of Ice and Fire. So interestingly, also A Song of Ice and Fire has a lot of climate change narrative. So
Yeah,
they were written around the same time too.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah, there is quite a lot of that. Let's see. We have also a comment. Swallow is the translation of Ciri's elder speech name Ziriel. Okay, which that tracks as well.
Yeah, Ciri. I mean, that's why Ciri will say, that the swallow is me. It's my name. It's
right. Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. So we've got right. The Wild Hunt takes place on the equinox. Not that we get that much information around that, but like also is that spoilery? I guess that's
I think we're.
Can we go spoilers? Let's okay.
All
right, cool.
People are here, I assume it's
okay.
They read it.
I think we're good. So, because the Wild Hunt happens on the equinox, which I think of as like this almost like spirit fairy type thing. We don't get a lot of detail on it, but then the equinox is also when Ciri kind of goes on a wild hunt with like taking down all of these people who were like trying to keep her like had her prisoner and everything
at the end.
Right? Yeah,
I was sorry, got distracted by comments for a second. I thought you were still talking about the beginning. I was like, wait, no, that's definitely not in the beginning. Wait, what?
no. It's like like the very, very beginning of the book is talking about the Wild Hunt on the equinox, and then at the end we kind of come full circle to like Ciri being at the center.
Revenge.
Yes, revenge. We have a lot of her getting revenge.
This was basically Andrzej Sapkowski's Best Served Cold.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And she gets a rose tattoo
in a lovely place.
That's a whole thing because her little girlfriend got one.
Mm-hmm. In a particular place.
Uh-huh. Much is made of that. I don't know what
we talked about it in the last book about like Ciri and like the start of what was going on between her and Missile. Missile? Is that right?
I don't remember.
The rat.
Yeah. Yep.
And just, I mean, this book also further explores like all the complicated, messy feelings that she has about her womanhood, about like sex and love, about like attraction, about intercourse, about like all those kinds of things that like she is not, you know, her introduction to a lot of these themes isn't necessarily the healthiest, but it's also like not, I don't know how to put it. Like the way that the book is handling it, it's not like, it's not moralizing ever about any of it. It's just kind of letting her go through this stuff, which is like not ideal in any way, but it's like not going through it and saying, well, this thing is bad and this thing is good and this thing needs therapy. It's very just like, this thing happened and this person is reacting to this thing happening to them. And that's it. And like, I really appreciate the kind of hands-offness of the narrative when it comes to that. It's just kind of letting Ciri just kind of like experience the feelings that she is experiencing without the like narrator then coming into like, because you can tell from a narrator if what they're saying a character is going through or feeling is good or bad a lot of the time. And here, like, it's like when Ciri is like, because I mean, Ciri is also like kind of telling her own narrative, which helps a little bit. But like, you know, it's Andrzej Sapkowski ultimately who's telling the narrative. And so there's not this like, this, I feel like a lot of narratives like this will often focus so much on how like ashamed a girl feels in order to be like, this was so traumatizing for her and look how ashamed she still feels about it. And it's like, it's not necessarily painted as blaming her, but it's still like, we need to focus on the shame because like she carries the burden of that shame and we feel so sorry for her. And I like that, like, it's not that there's no shame, but like Ciri, like that's not the focus of the narrative. It's not for Ciri to feel shameful about her body or about what has been done with her body or what she might want to do with her body. It's like never about shame.
No, I mean, there is an element of revenge in different ways, but that has more to do with Bonnart, who's like, you know, torturing her and feeding her narcotics. So, I mean, we definitely, I do think there's a shift with how he treats her that she undergoes that makes her different and makes her want to seek revenge in a way that she didn't previously.
But even before that, when she's kind of like, you know, experiencing, you know, male attraction to her body, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's just natural that I would feel attraction for you because you're so beautiful. And she's like, well, it's also supernatural for me to feel disgust with you because you're very unattractive. And but then at the same time, she's like, but also I'm curious. And she's like, I am. And
Yeah.
it's like, so it's not this like, you know, I would never, hands off, no means no kind of narrative.
Right.
She's like, you're unattractive and you don't like, you're not entitled to touch me, but that doesn't also mean that I'm not allowed to want you to touch me. And I might be interested, and it might be purely like kind of like transactional and exploratory, but like that's also allowed.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Else? I have so many notes on this one, more than I think I have on
Well,
other
and
ones
also
because
like
it was so much.
her, you know, girlfriend, if that's the word we want to use. Like she's also very young and also was like raised, you know, in kind of like crime and roughness. And so then like how she treats Ciri is like, it's not like somebody who's like, you know, it's not a oh, what's his name? Weinstein, you know, like a world wise, knowing person who knows exactly what they're doing and who they're doing it to, and like this like huge power imbalance. Like she's like, it's not ideal what she's doing with Ciri, and there's definitely like huge problems with that. But like she's not like this like powerful, knowing individual that is knowingly grooming someone either. Like she also is kind of messed up and working through her own stuff and is attracted to Ciri, and like it's a bunch of like messy people who are in a not ideal situation, kind of don't know the healthiest way to handle their feelings. So I like that it doesn't truly vilify her either, because like she's not like actively trying to like be an abuser or anything. Like abuse is happening, but not like you know, just like, you know, in a legal
Not maliciously.
Setting. Yeah, like in a legal setting, you know, like manslaughter versus like premeditated murder kind of thing. It's like, that's not to say that abuse did not occur, but it's not this like intentional, willful, malicious, like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, there was also this piece in chapter 2. There's the merchant that Ciri ends up traveling with, and he goes off on this whole thing about how he thinks that like relationships between women are against nature, and Ciri really pushes back on that.
Well, again, that's when she's like, it's against nature for me to be attracted to you because you're gross.
Right. Yeah. He was definitely a creep. Oh, but the fact that he like died as they were like starting to do something. I was like,
Ciri needs so much therapy.
oh, so much therapy. Oof, that's rough. Yeah. Uh, this is not in order. Oh yeah, that was funny. Okay. Dandelion's memoirs.
50 years or half a century of poetry.
50 years of poetry when
No, but he
he's
is
not
convinced later that half a century does sound better than 50 years. And he's
right.
like, you're right. That does sound way better. Geralt's
Right.
like, you're not 50 years old. He's like, but I will
Yeah.
be.
One day I'll be 50. I'm starting now.
And Regis is like, I mean, valid. Having some foresight, not a bad idea.
Oh,
And then we have
oh
the
gosh.
aside that like centuries hence, his memoirs of half a century of poetry is found and discarded.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Of course. Oh, that's hilarious.
I mean, Dandelion is definitely like here for comedic relief.
Which is needed, I feel like, with everything that's going on. It's definitely useful. What else? Oh, so like the big thing that I found really interesting is the shift between Geralt and Ciri, where Geralt like loses his medallion and is like, I'm no longer a Witcher. And Ciri is like, I'm a Witcher girl and I'm gonna do what I think a Witcher should do. And so you have this like shift where he's like, I don't know, that seemed kind of interesting that like she's trying to step into this
Well,
role and he's
a lot of like these books and this book maybe more so than the others, but throughout is constantly questions of like how people define themselves and whether or not they choose to define themselves according to their nation, according to their title, according to their birth, according to some fate or destiny. And so then like Geralt is constantly raging against certain forms of that, but he's always been very like, but I am a Witcher. And like he's like perfectly fine being defined by his occupation, but rejects destiny at all times, is like destiny is like not a thing. And like
right.
here we have like Geralt is now like in the previous book we had this whole thing of like neutrality being challenged and Geralt being like, just kidding, neutrality is not realistic. And here again, Geralt, like he's been very happy to reject destiny and be a Witcher. And here he's like now having to like unpack that.
Yeah. Yeah, that he's like, well, if I can't do magic, I don't have this medallion anymore, I'm no longer a Witcher, I'm just gonna have to figure out who I am then.
Yeah, but again, it's the idea of like, what is it that makes you a Witcher? Because like,
Right.
according to Geralt and his reaction to what's just occurred, it's that he was only a Witcher because he had the accoutrements of a Witcher. Whereas Ciri has none of the accoutrements of a Witcher. It's about like a mindset. And you
Right.
would think that that was Geralt's position on things because he was always like, here's my code and like, what is a monster and here's how I decide that and what I do. And it always seemed like intrinsic to who he is and how he views himself. Come to find out that like, if he does not have the uniform, he is no longer the Witcher. And like, that's a really different way of viewing like your calling or your your occupation. I guess his take on it then becomes one that it is an occupation rather than like
an identity.
Whereas Ciri is treating it as like an identity.
Like this is part of who I am. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also interesting because like for Ciri versus Geralt, being a Witcher is something that for Geralt is similar to Ciri and being the child of the Elder Blood or being Princess Cyrilla or being the Swallow. These are things that she didn't choose for herself. She was born into them. Geralt was born into being a Witcher. And she's rejecting being a princess and she rejected her magic. She rejects like a lot of these things and is choosing Witcherdom for herself. And Geralt is now rejecting the Witcherdom that he was born into and choosing a different path for himself. So
but he is choosing to go after Ciri regardless of the consequences, which is interesting that he has a moment where he's given
because he rejects destiny as a concept.
Right. Yeah. Someone's like, well, what if going after her, it's too late and you trying to do something will just hurt more people? He's like, I don't care.
Geralt's reaction to that is like, because like we're reading fantasy. So I think as fantasy readers, we're primed to take that kind of thing seriously and to be like,
Right.
you've been told a prophecy and you're disregarding it. That's so irresponsible. But then you think of yourself in real life. And if you like
Yeah.
had some fortune teller that says that like, don't go into work today, I have foreseen terrible things, you'll be like, that's stupid. And they're like, but I've just warned you and you're still going to do it anyway. Like, yes, I'm still going to do it anyway because you're crazy. So like,
Yep.
that's basically how Geralt's like, ooh, destiny is not a thing. I'm going to keep going on my quest now.
Yeah, he's like, I don't care what you say. This is what I'm doing. I'm gonna go save my girl. Which, yeah.
Which, like, if you don't believe in like prophecy and destiny, like, is the much more rational choice is to be
Yeah.
like, I think it's like, you know, a good idea to go save somebody. I'm not going to not save them because you were like, ooh, prophecy.
Yeah. I guess in terms of relating this to Soviet Union era, one thing that's interesting is we have this what is his name? I have it
I forget all the
written.
names because they're all
I
so like
know. I don't even know if I have them right. Wilberforce or something. So he's like the creepy
Vilgefortz.
doc. What?
Vilgefortz.
Vilgefortz. Yeah. So he's interesting because he is creepy. He's doing medical experimentation, experiments on fetuses and pregnant women, and is kind of like a I can't what's the word? There's a word for it for like people who try to determine like who should have children
Oh,
and
eugenics.
eugenics. He's kind of a eugenicist and also a
I mean,
medical.
that's been a theme throughout the Witcher books.
Right.
Eugenics.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but it is I think interesting in terms of thinking about some of the stuff that happened from like World War II and into the Soviet Union, where that was definitely a part of it, is like ideas about eugenics, medical experimentation on different people groups. And so you have some of that stuff coming
Well,
in
I mean,
into it.
like throughout that era and before and unfortunately after, I mean, anytime someone is justifying racism, there's like a desire to like base to try to find a scientific basis for it. And so
Right.
that's what a lot of this kind of thing is, to try to like instead of you know, like scientific research should be trying to like prove yourself wrong, but instead they're trying to prove themselves right. They've decided on their conclusion. Now they're just trying to find a way to like find evidence to support that conclusion.
Yeah. Yep. Somebody is saying Joseph Mengele. I'm not familiar with this person, but I'm assuming that he is one of the people who did this in history. So, yeah. Yeah. I might have also butchered how that name is pronounced, so apologies. Um, yeah, and then he's also I think taken Yennefer too, right? He's got her trapped and wants to use her in experiments and to get a hold of Ciri. He's
Yeah.
creepy.
Yeah. There's a lot of creeps in in these books. That's why Geralt, just by comparison, is like by
True
default
story.
he wins. That's
True,
why all the
true
women throw themselves at
story.
Geralt, because he's like, he's not a creep, ladies. Let's go.
Thank God. There's not a lot of options in this world.
But to me, the part that like that I was thinking of being like reading it as someone writing about basically fantasy Soviet Union is the like reporting on your neighbor and about whether or not you enforce, like the enforcers are really just the thugs, because like if this is going to be your system of governance, where like Geralt has that whole argument with him where he's like, basically in your world, the way that you want to set this up, that's good news for me because there will be nonstop work for a Witcher, because like this kind of like law and order where like people are, you know, tortured to give up names, and then like they're going to give up any name, and then you're not going to check it, and you're just going to go after those people. And like again, the whole like tattling on your neighbors to like the, you know, the, which is what they encouraged in the Soviet Union. So
Yep.
that's more the part that I was like, this is like,
Yeah.
it's not, you don't really see that much in fantasy books, is that kind of a conversation about, you see like a lot of like, you know, evil, you know, kings, and you see like armies slaughtering innocents. Like that's a lot of fantasy. It's not so much like the politics of like the local enforcer and
Right.
the like reporting on your neighbors. I was like, this is about the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Let's see. Oh, we had a comment saying, okay, so the Joseph person, he ran the medical experiments for Hitler. It's Mengele. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, well, and then we have this like the whole aside on Kovia being neutral and pro trade. Like, was a whole thing too of like, we're not going to get involved in war. We're just going to try to
Which
make
again
money,
feels like it's about like Soviet era European
right?
politics. And the
Absolutely.
fact
It's,
that we went out of
yeah,
our way to just have that aside, I was like, that's why
yep,
we're writing about this. Like,
yeah,
he's got
yeah,
to be in his bonnet about this, understandably. But like, that's why this is happening. And that's why he's like, this is not getting cut from the narrative. This is what I'm
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, yep. There was, oh, okay. There was this like random thing. I thought it was kind of entertaining though. There's this whole thing of the king and his wife, and the wife reads a story in a book about giving a neighbor who wants your dog a cat that you don't like instead. And then he uses that to like make political decisions. I just thought that whole thing
And the whole thing
was,
about don't give them a watermelon, give them half a watermelon, or better yet, a quarter of a
yes,
watermelon, because then other people might also give them. And then you're like, it was, yeah, it was a
yeah,
very
yeah. And
interesting
then you have
commentary on
somebody
how
from,
people are guided
right,
by like spiritual doctrine type of things, like
yes,
parable.
yeah, yeah, that was interesting. And the sorceresses were still doing their plotting. They're trying to figure out a way to like get Ciri married to some prince, I guess.
Yep. Ciri is everybody's pawn. You can see why she's
Yes.
like, nah, bruh, I'm gonna be a Witcher girl.
Yeah.
Although she can't quite remain incognito. She's like, "Nuh-uh, that's not true. Nuh-uh, I know this stuff. Like, that's not who that is, and I know for a fact it's not." Like, and they're like,
Yep.
"Shh, you're trying to hide."
Stop it. Yeah. Yeah. No. Oh goodness. We learned some new stuff. I mean, I guess you kind of know this if you've seen the Witcher show, but like we learn in this that the ship with Ciri's parents didn't actually go down, or like that's not when her mom died. So we realized like maybe things aren't what they seem. And that was interesting, this whole thing of like the blood of the queens of Sintra is tied to the ocean, and when one of them dies there's like these crazy storms.
It's a good fantasy way to be like, we've checked and there was no proof of death.
Right. Yes. Yep. Oh yeah, there's also the seagull. This Tower of the Seagull. Who's the seagull? What's the sea? I don't know. Because she has to go through the Tower of the Seagull to the Tower of the Swallow. There were a lot of bird towers in this book.
I told you. I'm at my limit for understanding symbols. I think I've done good.
You've done great. Yeah.
I mean, you
If
did
anybody,
just say that like the Cintran women have a connection to the sea, and a seagull is by its definition a sea-related bird. So
true, true.
perhaps there is also again the limitation of like this was written in
Yeah.
Polish. And I know
Right.
like I should be better at reading symbols because I'm Latvian, and like the amount of nature like things that are in Latvian songs and poetry, it's 99.9% like birds and trees and stuff is like what we're singing about, and the birds are
Yep.
never birds and the trees are never trees, and I'm just like, I don't, someone explain it to me. So like I know that like in Latvian, like if you like were talking about an oak tree and you were talking about a linden tree, I would understand that you're talking about a man and a woman. But like if you translated that into English, I wouldn't necessarily make those assumptions anymore. And I'd be like, I don't know
Right.
what an oak tree is supposed to be here. Like he's wearing an oak tree symbol. Like who cares? Whereas so like I don't know if there's connotations beyond like what we find in the book for like
Mhm.
what a swallow is or what a seagull is. So
Well, it makes me wonder if maybe it's supposed to be representative of her dad.
sure.
Maybe that's
Sure.
could make sense because the whole thing with the boat and like I don't know.
But I mean, everything to do with her bloodline is very like matriarchal.
Yeah, that's true.
She's the child of the elder blood through her mother, not through
That
her
is
father.
that is
Her
that is
father
also
provided
true.
like the recessive genes that needed the right mixing to like make
Yep.
it be, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And then I liked the hermit that kind of takes her in and everything. And
Which again reminded me of Best Served Cold, from the beginning of Best Served Cold, when also like a random man finds her and is like patching her up.
true. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I thought it was interesting the repetition that you get over and over again. The chapters where Ciri is with the hermit, you would always have this repetition of this thing of like if somebody could have seen into the room, they would have seen this, but they couldn't because it was the swamp and nobody knew that they were there. And like you kind of get that over and over,
which I suspect sounds more like I think it's meant to be evoking this kind of like the storiness of it, you know, which
yes.
like I think in Polish probably works a little bit better than it does in English, but like we still like get the vibe.
Yeah. That was the sense of it. Well, especially because they're also she's telling a story or he's telling a story, and then that's kind of
It's also kind of
repeating.
cinematic in the way that like
Yeah.
you'll like zoom out to remind everybody that we're like, oh, this little cottage in the middle of like a vast nothing, and you see the little light
Right.
in the window, and like you're like, that's where they are. And then we go
Right.
back and zoom into like the telling and the flashback. So like it's partly just like a cinematic thing.
Yeah. I liked it.
But it is interesting, which again could be a language thing, but that even when Siri is telling her own story, it's told still in third person.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't switch to first person because she's telling her story.
Yep. That's true. Yeah. And then like everything that happens, I feel like in chapter 11 was just very epic.
Which one is 11?
The
end?
the end. Yeah, like the final chapter. Because
yeah, the chapters are few and long, which doesn't help with pacing.
No, but like the chapter 11, this is the whole thing of she's searching for the Tower of the Swallow, being chased. That boy from forever ago that liked her wants to go to war to save her, but he can't because he's
They're
supposed
like,
to be studying
stop
stuff.
you don't need to go out there and help Siri.
It's like, she's fine, leave it alone.
Well, she's not fine, but what are you gonna do about
it? Yeah, it's not your job. And then
it's like the vibe of like the boy running and someone like holding his collar, so he's like trying
it's
to
like
run.
no it's like no, you're not, that's not for you. And okay, what did I write? Yen wakes up with Rience and before it's did he take okay. I don't know what I was saying here. I was clearly typing this like somebody was disfigured from Siri entering the Tower of the Seagulls. I don't remember what that was. Somebody, was it the doctor guy that was disfigured?
I mean, she continued her rampage.
I think it might have been that.
But speaking of here, like we have this whole thing of like she is the betrayer, but then we also then switch to her perspective where we see how she became, like how she was put in a position where she could be a betrayer, and also how she would be then continued to be known as a betrayer, even though that's not totally true because it's not in the interest of the lodge to like set the record straight. So screw you, Yennefer. And she's like, great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's got her own agenda. I do think it's interesting, right? There's this whole thing of he's trying to use her psychic connection to bait Ciri, but instead she only gives him Geralt, and he didn't even know she had a close connection to Geralt. But yeah.
But the fact that, I mean, like Geralt figures out like how they've been like spied upon. Like he figures that out and is like, we've been betrayed and I know how. And then later she's like, we see how that happens with her and why that happens. And then also her being like, can you like make sure he knows that I wasn't trying to betray him? And they're like, oh.
Like, yeah,
and you're like,
we're not doing that.
Because that's what these two definitely need is more drama and miscommunication.
Yeah, perfect. Of course. That's how it's gonna go. Okay, speaking of cinematic though, the scene where Ciri is like a wraith on ice skates killing all these people on the lake, I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, she's a badass.
She is.
Which I do like. I mean, I do feel like it's pretty earned. Like, I feel like, okay, I know you like the Throne of Glass books, but so much of why I was annoyed when I started reading those books was because, like, there's especially, like, well, I think I only read the first two or something, but, like, there's all this, oh, she's the greatest assassin of all time. She's the most amazing assassin. She's the most assassiny assassin that ever assassined.
I mean, yeah.
And you're like, I see no evidence of this. Like, she's doing nothing. And like when it comes to actually doing something, she's like, oh, it was so traumatic to actually shed blood. I'm going to go cry for a week. And you're like, I thought you were the most assassin-y assassin of all assassins. And so here, like we've watched like little Ciri who's like, I'm a princess. You can't talk to me like that. Like, like level up through great trauma and travesty into like Wraith Ciri, like taking revenge, like with her like scarred face, and you're like, we have watched this journey, and this moment is like not only earned, but it's satisfying for us, because we're like, revenge isn't something that like is healthy, and she gets told that, and she's like, screw you. Which is like, fair enough.
Yeah.
So it's not that you're like, she's like going around slaughtering people, and that's not healthy for her or for them or for society. But at the same time, when you watch that, you're like, yeah, get him.
Yeah, well, because she's been through so much, you understand it. Yeah, Jessica says that was epic. I love how she cut his fingers off. Yeah, that was. Ooh,
it was, you know what it was? It was Kill Bill.
It was very Kill Bill. Yes, 100%, and I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is again why to like constantly to always circle back to this in case people have forgotten. Books can have a male gaze and also be feminist. So like Ciri is like actually the main character of this series, and we've seen Ciri. She's a really complex character with a lot of layers, and we've seen a really like nuanced handling of like her as a child, her growing into womanhood, her understanding what that means for herself from not just a sexual perspective, but also the sexual perspective. And like to this point where she's like taking revenge because she has been mistreated. And like there's just like so much to her journey and to her character that I think, not to say that it was done perfectly or without any like kind of like sexist tendencies in some of the like the kind of gaze of the story, but like I don't know how you make it this far in the series and not find something feminist in it.
I would tend to agree with you. I think this is the thing though, is I think sometimes people can get a little bit caught up in, well, this character did this sexist thing, therefore the book is sexist. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. Like both of those things can exist together. And I think they do here. Yeah. And in some ways, I wonder if this makes it more effective, at least for a larger audience, because it is, I mean, I like a good preachy feminist book, but also not everybody does. And
well, like, I mean, it legitimately is Kill Bill, and Kill Bill, no one is like walking around saying like, oh, this is a feminist like soapboxy women's movie,
right?
But it also is like all women all the time, basically, except for Bill, and like,
yeah. Oh, and we get unicorns, which is also exciting.
This book is basically Lisa Frank.
Yeah.
Birds and unicorns and
with
rainbows.
A lot more blood, you know?
Yeah. But also we get Ciri's double. And like when she and Geralt like connect, and Geralt's legitimately like, she looks so much like Ciri that he thinks it is Ciri until like he does a double take. And then he's like, I don't know how I could have mistaken her for Ciri, but he definitely did. And then like there's that moment. I mean, there's a lot with her character that's interesting, and they're like how he's like clearly latching onto her as like a surrogate Ciri, which is like her entire role at all times is to be a surrogate Ciri for political reasons, for emotional reasons, for Geralt. Like that's what she's doing. And then there's that moment where, because of it's so telling. I mean, it's not that we didn't know this about her background. We did already know this, but it's so telling when she tells Geralt, I know how to express gratitude. And Geralt is horrified, and it doesn't know how to express that healthily either. He's not like, oh, you've been through some unhealthy situations, we should talk about why that's not appropriate. He's like, no. Oh my God. He's like horrified. And she's like, are you really don't? Like, you really not into it? And he's like, just cannot function at the suggestion of that, because one, I think generally be horrified by that no matter what. But two, in his mind, she's surrogate Ciri. So it's like Ciri offering that to him. And he's just like not capable of expressing why this is bad
because
wrong.
She's like his daughter, essentially. And he's not a creep.
So like it was so telling for like her story and for his story and for how they're thinking of each other in that moment. Because also when she says that, like it's so like heartbreaking, because like she doesn't see anything like wrong with that, and she sincerely wishes to express gratitude for him like saving her basically. But this is the only way that she's like ever like been taught or learned, or her life experiences told her that like
so tragic.
This is what you do. And so they're like she's sincerely like, I want to express gratitude, and I will like gladly do so for you.
Right.
And Geralt is like horrified by that because like he thinks of her as a human being and he didn't save her for that reason, but he doesn't know how to express that in a caring way. He only knows how to be horrified and reject her. And she's like, "You're rejecting me?" And it's like this like such a layered moment with like so much complexity for both of their characters and for the whole situation. And it's like so brief, but like just that like
Yeah.
that scene alone has so much nuance that like, well done, Andrzej
Yeah.
Sapkowski.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think he does a good job with a lot of little scenes here that are saying things and doing a lot for character development. So I think it's impressive.
So I can do that. I can't tell you what a seagull is. But like
Matt says at the end of the day, I think we're all just looking for a surrogate Siri.
I do love Siri.
I do too. I think she's great.
I'm
And I
sad
love
that we don't see like after she's little and after she gets trained up in Kaer Morhen, Geralt and Ciri don't get to be like in each other's company very much in the series, which is like some of my favorite stuff. And
Yeah.
it's very sad. I mean, I get narratively why they're not, but if they're supposed to be destined, I mean, can they be destined in the same room, please? Like
That would be nice. But yeah, no, apparently not. So yeah, I like also Ciri gets a major power up at the end of this book. So we're kind of left with her
well, she hit like her
through
lowest low, and so now she's
right.
like
Right. And now she's like has power over time and I guess went through a portal to a place with spring where she's with unicorns. And then some elf shows
I
up
mean,
at
you've
the
seen
end
the
and is
cover
like,
of Lady of the Lake.
it's such a good cover.
It's my least favorite, but
Really? Is it because it's purple?
it's very much because it's purple, but it's also because it's got like this kind of like rocker modern look to it, to the art. Whereas like this is like a castle and horses and everything has been like castles and horses. And then she looks like she could be like in a modern day like punk rock girls band. And like it's just like a very different aesthetically. Like it doesn't go with like the other covers.
I guess. I like it though, because she looks cool and has a unicorn with
And
her.
it's extremely purple.
It is very purple. I like purple, so I don't mind that, but that's funny. But then there's the elf. Who's the elf? The elf shows up and is like, "What took you so long?" And
Indeed.
we don't know who the elf is, or I don't know who the elf is.
Indeed.
I guess
I
we'll
guess
find
you'll have
out.
to read and find out.
I guess I will. Let's see. From pit fighter to portal princess, not too shabby. True story. That is her arc in this book.
I'm not sure that's exactly how I would summarize her whole arc, but it's missing a lot of them.
It is missing a lot, but that's where she sort of starts and gets, I guess. Portal princess. That's funny. Yeah. Anything else on this?
No. Yes. And I guess I would like to know your predictions. Where are we going? The next book's the last book.
Oh.
Saul needs to get up in the next book. That's why it is the longest of all of them.
Oh, okay. Wait, so is the one because we're taking a break and then is it a prequel? Is the other one a prequel?
I believe timeline-wise it takes place after The Last Wish, but before the main series. I'm not exactly sure timeline-wise. I know it doesn't take place after the main series, definitely not that. Yeah. But I'm not sure exactly where before the end of the series, like where it takes place exactly. I'm not sure.
Okay, so this is like it. Oh wow. I don't know. What do I think? I mean, Ciri's gonna change things, clearly. I don't know.
She's gonna join a rock band.
Yeah, a unicorn rock band. Exactly. The Purple Unicorns.
Maybe it'll be called, I was gonna say, be called Iron Unicorn.
Iron Unicorn.
That would be a pretty badass band name.
It would. Someone should take that. Yeah, I mean, I think she's gonna change things, but I also suspect that she's not gonna do what people expect from her.
at this point, when you say what people expect from her, there are so many different people expecting so many different things from her. So, like, which
True.
expectations will she be shattering?
Like any prophesied expectations, I feel like, or what people assume. I don't know.
There's
I
also
don't
like many fantasy books. I would argue most fantasy books that use prophecy in any way. It's usually in a way that's like, oh, the prophecy didn't mean what you thought it would
but
mean.
it could mean something else.
Where
But I
like it'll
think the
come
people
true, but
right.
not in the way that you would have expected.
Yes.
I'm not saying that's what happens. I'm just saying that like
Yeah.
prophecy books usually do stuff like that. So like when you say that if something can be breaking your expectations, even if technically you were told this to expect this thing, but it was,
Yeah.
done in a way where you're like, you did tell me, but that's not what I thought you meant.
Right. I mean, I think she's going to be in some way instrumental in like making space for elves, but I don't know if that will be in that world or in a different world or how. I don't know. I don't really know what to expect.
Well, there's also like throughout the books, we've constantly heard about like climate change, race
Yes.
relations,
Right.
the Nilfgaard taking over, the child of the elder blood. Like there's like so many like thematic threads. And every time they have an encounter with somebody like magical prophecy wise person, they're always talking about like the changing of the world and the changing of the seasons and the changing of the weather and the changing of the times and the
Yeah.
changing of the peoples and like
I
yeah.
mean, I feel like it could be the takedown of Nilfgaard, which would be interesting for a lot of reasons. And then like sort of like small free states
The
scattered.
fantasy UN.
The fantasy UN. Yeah.
So your prediction is that Ciri will become the queen of the fantasy UN.
I don't know that I would say she would be the queen of it, but I think that she would be instrumental in taking down Nilfgaard.
Well, we had a
And
prophecy in this book that Geralt did reject, but the prophecy was that like he would regain Ciri only to immediately lose her. So one, do you think that that's going to be true at all? And two, if so, how?
possibly it could be that she gets married.
But then him reclaiming, like, is it losing her if she that's the idea that like a woman is given away by the father to the husband, like that
Well,
he's losing her is very like she's chattel to be traded.
but like if it's done in the right way, it could be using
By
that
which
to
you
like
mean the
make
wrong
commentary
way.
on the problem with I don't know. I don't know. We'll see.
Ciri
I don't
doesn't feel
know.
like a blushing bride, but
No. But she might marry somebody for political reasons.
that's what they more often than not princesses do.
Yeah.
Although her
Or
mom certainly broke the rules with
true.
Dooney. How do they say it?
Dooney. I think Dooney. Yeah.
That guy, Hedgehog Man.
Yeah, I would love to see Geralt and Yen have a happily ever after, but I feel like it's probably not going to happen.
Those two crazy kids. They'll have a lilac and gooseberry scented honeymoon.
Indeed.
I
Indeed.
don't think we got a single mention of lilac and gooseberry in this book, so 5 stars.
Yen was in too much trouble. She didn't have time for her perfume this time. Yeah. Yeah. So
There,
we'll
you could use diamonds are a girl's best friend for this book, though.
That's true. Well, she has this kind of interesting thing, right? Where with this goddess that she doesn't even believe in, who ends up deciding to help her anyway, right?
Which
I
is
don't
like
know,
very
like,
much like
yeah,
paralleling constantly with Geralt's thing of like, I reject destiny, I reject
right.
prophecy. And all these druids and elves are always like, you have a great destiny. Let us
Yes,
set you on your way for your destiny is like,
yes.
screw destiny.
I want nothing to do with it.
So like
Yeah,
Yennefer and Geralt are constantly being like, screw everybody, we're not doing your thing. Like they're
yeah,
basically the hot topic kids who are like, no, we're
pretty
not part of
much.
your system. And everyone's like, you're a part of the system.
Yeah, yeah. But I feel like it worse because they're sort of raising Ciri, who also doesn't want to be part of the system.
I mean,
So
Ciri's been raised by a huge village. Because like also
true.
Triss Marigold, also all of the Witchers in Kaer Morhen, a little bit
Yep.
Dandelion, like there's so many, and then she was raised obviously in part by her grandma.
Yeah.
There's so many people have had a hand with Ciri.
It's true. Ultimately, though, I think she's going to decide who she wants to be for herself.
She has been.
Yeah.
She's always been quite assertive, even from a young age.
Which I like. I like her.
We like that.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, we will be back to conclude the main series, I guess. Next month. Series about
it. It really is her series, though.
It is. Well, and she's a Witcher girl, so is she the Witcher?
I mean, I don't think it was intended that way, but I mean, arguably.
I think it fits.
It's a misdirect. You thought the Witcher series was about Geralt? I didn't say that. I just said the Witcher.
I just said the Witcher. Which Witcher? Yeah. So we are going to move into On My Radar, where we'll share recent and upcoming book releases we're excited about. But first, if you enjoyed the podcast, we would appreciate if you take a moment to rate and review us so we can reach more listeners, or leave us a comment down below if you're watching us on YouTube. And of course, if you're interested in getting exclusive bonus content with every episode, consider supporting us on Patreon or channel memberships and toss a coin to your podcasters. Huge thanks to all of our supporting patrons, including our World Expander patron, Stephanie. You all make what we do possible. We appreciate you. And as a reminder, this week's bonus content is going to be talking Portal Fantasy. So that should be fun. Do you have any books?
I do.
I thought so. Okay.
You thought so?
Well, yeah, because one on my list I figured would be on your list. So.
Well, I already talked about Lightbringer last time, so not that.
All right then.
But House of Roots and Ruin came out today.
Yes.
And it's a sequel to House of Salt and Sorrows, which was a surprise hit with me when it came out. And then I really enjoyed the book she wrote after that, which was not related to it at all.
Yeah.
I think she's really, really good with like vibes and atmosphere. So House of Salt and Sorrows, for people who don't know, is a retelling of I don't think ever retold fairy tale, The 12 Dancing Princesses. Like, I frankly have literally never seen anyone retell that. So it's a retelling of 12 Dancing Princesses, but it's like a very kind of like moody gothic seaside thriller kind of vibe. And the vibes were so immaculate, very spooky. So House of Roots and Ruin is a sequel, and I believe it follows another of the sisters. I'm not totally sure, but I'm sure it will have immaculate vibes.
Yeah, I've really liked both of the books that she's written so far as well. So yeah, that looks exciting. I have just a couple of other ones. So one is The Center by Aisha Manazir Siddiqui, which is I don't know, kind of like a literary horror thriller sort of thing. And it's a book that I kind of recommend for people who like the themes of Babel but want something that does it better with more nuance and better character work.
Saying the quiet part out loud.
You know. It's pretty interesting. It's about a woman who's I think actually also like in her 30s, who is trying to like find herself, is living off of the wealth of her South Asian parents but living in London, and she dates this white guy who goes to this mysterious center where supposedly you can become fluent in a language in just 10 days with this like secretive process. And so she decides to go and try to learn German so she can do a great work of translation and stuff. But like, what is the process and what is the cost? And it's creepy and weird, but it
sounds really a lot like Vita Nostra. Have you read Vita Nostra?
I had trouble with that one, but yeah, this is is not as fever dreamy as Vita Nostra. But I think it's really good, and I think it's tackling some similar themes to Babel, but is just a lot better. So
I would say it's not hard to be better, but
well, I think this is good, and it's a debut. It's a really good debut. Anyway, and then the other one is Silver Nitrate by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, who I always love. This is a return to horror for her. It's mostly set in the 90s, but it's about like in Mexico City, but it's about like cult classic films, cursed films, and Nazi occultism. And it's great. It's definitely slow burn, character driven, but horror. And I always like her. I think she does a good job. So yeah. So if you're interested, go check those out. And I will be back. Next episode is August 15th. Me and Izzy are going to be talking about Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey and the brand new book Cassiel's Servant that's just about to come out, which is basically Kushiel's Dart told from the perspective of Jocelyn, who's one of the main characters. And so that should, I think, be a very interesting conversation. I just finished reading Kushiel's Dart for the first time, and I'm in process with Cassiel's Servant, so we'll be back to discuss. And then me and Leanna will be back at the end of August for the next Witcher book. So again, this has been Chapter 3 Podcast. We're your hosts, Bethany and Leanna. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Chapter 3 Podcast, and you can follow us on our individual YouTube channels. This episode's bonus content will be available to patrons and channel members in the next few days.